I would like to learn today, B'ezrat Hashem, Lilui Nishmat Marcelo Shor, who was a wonderful, amazing, fascinating, and very dear, and who left the world on Simchat Torah 3 years ago. Much too early. He was not 60 years old. Hi, Shabbat Tov, welcome. So, Lilui Nishmat Marcelo. So last week we had a very, very important, actually, we took a very important digression, a very important side journey into discussing the laws of damages. Okay. Anyway, so I want to take a moment, or maybe what might end up being half of today's shiur, to talk about laws of damages, and to talk about Rambam, in particular Rambam's view, as I understand it, of society and of how these laws function, how they're supposed to function, and why they're important. And unfortunately, Chaim Gur, who raised the issue last week, is not here with us today. Good morning, Shabbat Tov. But he was very persistent on the notion of if somebody does a permanent physical damage to another person, and the case is welcome. We're just talking about your case.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm glad you're here. So last week you were very concerned about the notion of ayin tachat ayin, and about what happens if a person, God forbid, knocks out another person's eye. And you correct me if I'm misquoting or misinterpreting what you said, but you were very concerned by what you expressed as the idea that if all the person has to do is write a check, then he gets away with having injured another person. Okay. So the case of ayin tachat ayin, first of all, does not apply to a person who is a serial knocker out of other people's eyes. That is clearly a case of where society, that's why we have things like police forces and jails and so on and so forth, right? The case of ayin tachat ayin is a case where I would say mostly, not with the specific intent of doing a particular type of damage to another person, but there's a confrontation which escalates, becomes physical, and then there is an injury as a result. So I want to take a little bit of a sidebar today and talk about the Torah's notion of damages, and also about Rambam's view. So Rambam basically, if you will, the politics of Rambam, his notion of why we need laws and why a society needs to be structured in a certain way is, and it is not something that he's like making up or off on some kind of a bizarre tangent. And the Torah itself gives us is a blueprint in many respects for creating and maintaining a just and a well-functioning society. It establishes hierarchies, it establishes laws, both criminal and civil. It establishes religious parameters and practices. It establishes who's in charge of what, who is obligated to give certain types or take certain types of leadership roles, who is obligated to follow those leaders. It also establishes social safety nets on many levels. So it's really a comprehensive blueprint for building a just society and for maintaining that society. Rambam says that the purpose of, and this is the very beginning of his Hilchot Teshuva, that the purpose of existence and the foundation of all wisdom is to discover God for ourselves. And we can have a whole separate shiur on the very first sentence of Hilchot Teshuva, because he doesn't say that the purpose of existence is to know, because knowledge is something that we each come to in a different way. The purpose of existence is to get to know, is to come to know, is to come to know for ourselves, is to discover the existence of God, the unity of God, and insofar as we are capable with our insufficient mental and spiritual capacities, the nature of God. And as he says in other places as well, the reason that we pray for physical health, for peace in our society, for material sustenance, is not because they are goods in themselves, and not that they are ends in themselves. They're all very good things, and they're all ends that we should aspire to. But as like I'm sure you've had the conversation where you talk to people who are skeptical about religion and religious practice, and they'll say, well, I don't need religion to tell me how to be a good person. I don't need the Torah to teach me morality. And my first response to that is, you're absolutely right. Nobody needs religion to teach you how to be a good person. Nobody needs the Torah to teach morality. You need the Torah to teach you how to be a complete person. And the Jew is, as the, if you will, the chosen people. What we're chosen for is we're chosen for a lifetime of obligations and responsibilities which are based on our relationship with God. And so the good behavior of giving charity, for example, that a person who rejects religion or rejects the Torah or what have you, the good behavior of giving charity, it is undeniably good behavior. But I would submit that within the context of a Torah observant lifestyle, that the giving of charity then operates on many, many more levels, because as we know, what we do here in this world affects what goes on in the worlds above, right? And then what goes on in the worlds above comes in response to what we do here. And so by giving charity not in the context of a Torah life, let's say, it's an impoverished act. Welcome, Shabbat Tov. It's not a bad act, Chalila, but it's impoverished. It's missing so much. Okay? So the reason for creating and maintaining a just society, for creating all of these laws, and for creating social balance, is to free... Welcome. The reason for creating these laws and for creating a balanced, functioning society is to free the individual from the cares of survival, of having to fight for the scrap of bread and so on. To free the individual to pursue the knowledge of God. That's the whole purpose in Rambam's view of why we pray for material goods and sustenance and health, why we pray for peace in our society and in our world. The whole purpose of the social structure and of the underpinnings, if you will, or the foundation of our very lives, is to free us insofar as possible to pursue the knowledge of God. So this is a shir from the Maimonides Heritage Center. I'm happy to make it available if people want to make copies of it. But he talks about Rambam's view from his own laws of nezikim, laws of wounds and damages. First of all, straight from the Gemara, there are 5 levels of damages that a person's required to pay. And again, so Chaim Gur, this is not talking about a criminal or a psychopath who goes around on purpose damaging people. It's talking about in the course of normal functioning society, people get angry at each other, things happen, accidents happen. Please.
Question. The people who have kind of a mental certificate or something, and they use it. They sometimes you sometimes come across people that say, I can harm you and nothing will happen to me because I've got a certificate and the police will not do anything.
I don't know what you're talking about.
There are people who they have a certificate that they are crazy or something like this. And they harm other people with full knowledge, with full awareness that they're not going.
If they're crazy, they don't have full knowledge. If they have full knowledge, they're not crazy. If they're not crazy, they don't get a certificate. If they have a certificate, they should be locked up. And I'm sorry, but I don't know what you're talking about. That somebody has a piece of paper it's called 007, license to kill. That's what you're talking about?
No, it's not license to kill. There are people for example, they terminally ill or something, and they for example have permission to smoke drugs and things, and if they harm somebody, I'm talking about something that I've been through. Somebody harmed me really badly and got away with it completely because they have, for the police they're untouchable. So in case of...
Why were they untouchable?
Because they have terminal illness and they're on drugs, and the police said they are not responsible.
I'm very sorry to hear about that.
But this person is harmed in full knowledge and told me to my face I can harm you and get away with it.
You didn't mention that last time. I'm very sorry to hear that. That sounds to me like a breakdown in the proper functioning society.
Can one revenge on such a person who did harm and full knowledge of damage somebody's life, like for good?
You can or you cannot? Are you asking or telling?
Yeah, I'm asking.
Whether you can want to get revenge on them?
Yeah.
Well, according to what we just learned last week from Hilchot Teshuva, it's the nature of Bnei Israel to be Rahmaniyut, to be, forgiving.
I have no idea what they Jewish is all about. It's fascinating.
Whether they're Jewish or not, but you are.
Okay. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And whatever, and again, this goes to the heart of how a society is supposed to function. And as Gabriel was saying, that from last week, that, God forbid somebody suffers a permanent damage that prevents them from carrying out their profession, right? It's not up to the individual to fix that. If somebody cuts off your hand, you don't fix it by cutting off their hand, right? If, in terms of my emotional state, my emotional response to it, God forbid somebody does something to me that inflicts permanent damage, somebody cuts off my hand, I don't want to cut off their hand, I want to kill them. And I don't want to kill them from afar, I want to kill them with my bare hands. I want to feel it and I want to feel them die. And a lot of people have those feelings, which is why society says, you know what, we're going to have some different rules, right? So in the Gemara, a person who inflicts damage on another person is obligated to pay 5 things, right? The damage, pain, cure, the loss of revenue, and busha, humiliation, right? And it's a well-known sugya in the Gemara, and the Rambam is kind of just, putting it together in kind of a digest précis over here. How is damage calculated? And again, this is right from the Gemara. And you can stop me if this is getting too inside baseball-y, and we can jump back to Rambam directly. If he cut off someone's hand or foot, we consider him as though he were a slave for sale in the market. How much was he worth previously, and how much would he be worth today with this damage? Again, this is right from the Gemara. This is not Rambam, making up laws on his own. Something that he doesn't do, right? And as the fact that the Torah says, as someone who has made a wound in another, so shall one be made in him. This does not mean to wound the other as the other wounded him, but rather that he deserves to lose a limb or to receive a wound as he did, and therefore he pays him monetary compensation. And this is the key of the way Chazal have read. We say that this is actually in the Torah where it says ayin tachat ayin, an eye for an eye. The Gemara does not consider monetary damage as an interpretive or a kind of a taich on that, but rather that's pshat, that it does not mean a physical eye for a physical eye. So if you subscribe to, or if you are interested or attracted at all to, let's say, the hypothesis that says that the Torah is a document that reflects its historical context, the place and time in which it was given, one might say that this reading of the Torah, or this, the fact that the Torah places the incidence of an eye and a leg and a hand and a wound and so on and so forth in a long sequence of other monetary damages, the rabbis, from its context, say obviously the Torah is not saying I have to poke out somebody's eye, but rather that I have to calculate the value of the eye to the person who lost it, and the person who caused the damage has to pay it, right? So that, we could say, is a reflection of how the Torah has restated laws from surrounding cultures that were perhaps more barbarous, where, in fact, in the surrounding culture where, God forbid, there was an accident and I got into a fight with somebody, and by accident I knocked out his eye, they're going to take me into the marketplace and they're going to poke out my eye, and that'll serve me right. Well, a society that functions that way cannot long survive, and the proof is that, Baruch Hashem, we're still here. And Hammurabi, I don't know, my wife went to law school, I don't think that they read, I did a lot of studying with her, we never read Hammurabi, okay? So I would like to move on, with your permission, to and by the way, if anybody knows it, so we have this one copy of the English version, and I bought another one which I brought and donated for this year, but I can't find the second one. This was from the set that was already there upstairs. If anybody has an extra minute to look around, if you can find the other one, it would be great to have extra copies floating around. We are now, Bezrat Hashem, at the beginning of the third parak. And each of these parakim has a kind of a theme, if you will. So the theme of the first parak was just, introducing the concept of Teshuva, and particularly the act of vidui, which means that Teshuva is not something like I sit there and I said, oh, I wish I hadn't done that, but rather that it engages us physically, right? Judaism, unlike some other religions, there's a full partnership between the body and the soul, right? That we don't just sit inside and contemplate, but we rather do acts of Kedusha, and that, in fact, that the body is, in a sense, a training ground for the soul, right? There's the principle that Rambam alludes to in a few places, I believe later in the Sefer as well. Famous principle from the Gemara of you should do something even if you're not completely into it at the moment, even if your kavanah is not so strong, because mitoch lo lishma ba lishma. From doing a behavior over and over again, even if it's not for the right reason, we slowly and gradually train ourselves to come towards the right reasons. And when we think about how we learn, from childhood up, right? We can learn a concept intellectually, but in order to internalize it, we need to live it. And in order to live it as Jews, we need to practice it, right? That's why it's called practicing Judaism, right? We get up in the morning, we daven, we put on tefillin, we say brachot, we perform mitzvot. When we give, as we said before, the giving of charity, not in a Jewish or not in a Torah context, is a great thing for society, but the giving of tzedakah in the Torah context, just look at the English word charity, which means like I give from the goodness of my heart, and the Hebrew word tzedakah, which means that I must reestablish the righteousness I must restore the social balance, that I have something that rightly I should be giving to somebody else, right? It's not my money, it's God's money. And God, Chazal tell us it's not ours, it's from God, and we have to recognize it as from God. And God watches what we do with the money that God gives us, right? And if we do good with the money, chances are God will give us more, right? In fact, it's a halacha that we are allowed to ask God to give us a raise in salary, a bonus, a windfall. We're allowed to say to God, please God, I need you to give me an extra $1 million, and I will give 20% of it in tzedakah. As long as we make it conditional that I will give tzedakah from that additional money, it's fine to ask God for that. It's an interesting halacha, but it also it exemplifies really this whole relationship of our practice to our relationship with God. So I would say that the theme of this parak, of the third parak, certainly starts anyway from the notion of responsibility, achrayut, as the Mishnah says, bishvili nivra ha'olam. The world was created for me. What does it mean that it was created for me? It doesn't mean that I can go and take whatever I want. It means that it's my job to take care of the world. So, shall we begin? Kol echad ve'echad mibnei ha'adam yesh lo zchuyot va'avonot. Every individual person. By the way, mibnei ha'adam, not mibnei Israel. Right? Every person, not just every Jew, has zchuyot, has merits, and avonot, has transgressions. Not transgressions.
Demerits.
Demerits, good. Okay. Yes, it's stronger than transgressions. Right. Mi zchuyotav yeterot me'avonotav tzaddik. Person whose merits are greater than their demerits is called a tzaddik. Mi she'avonotav yeterot al zchuyotav rasha. A person whose demerits are greater than their merits is considered wicked. So first of all, Rambam is giving us the baseline definition from the Gemara of that being a tzaddik or a rasha is like a cheshbon, right? It's an arithmetic calculation. What are my zchuyot and what are my avonot, and how do they balance? Which side of the balance scale goes up? The machzeh benoni, and a person who's exactly equal, 50-50, is a benoni, somebody in the middle, right? Not benoni necessarily in the sense of Sefer Tanya, which Maybe one day we'll also have a shiur in Sefer Tanya, but this is because in Sefer Tanya, as the Rabbi says, he takes, these are all borrowed terms, right? What Rambam is doing is like when two people go to court together, right, and the person who wins is called Zachai, right? He's has Zechut. The person who loses the court case is considered Kilu Rasha for the purpose of the court case. Doesn't mean that they're fundamentally a wicked person. It means that they lost the court case. It means that they were wrong. Okay, and here the Benoni means just as somebody whose Zechuyot and Avonot perfectly balance out. How often that's going to happen, I don't know. V'chein hamedina im hayu zechuyot kol yeshoveiha merubot al avonotehem harei zo tzedakah. It's a tzedekah. And also a nation. If all of the inhabitants of that country, if their zechuyot, if their merits are greater than their demerits, then it's called a righteous nation. V'im hayu avonotehem merubim harei zo rasha. And if their demerits are greater than their merits, then it's a wicked nation. V'chein kol ha'olam kulo. And thus with the entire world. Which is actually in Yana Diyoma, that yesterday we read Parshat Noach, where God looked at the world and said, there's not enough zchuyot in this world, I'm going to destroy it. Right? Interesting that God destroys not just the human beings, but all the animals. Interesting that Noach even had to save the birds. Right? The only things that survived on their own, presumably, were the fish. Right? So, I would suggest that in a very, very, very stark way, Parshat Noach doesn't suggest, it tells us that our behavior, for good or for ill, our moral behavior, our moral character affects the entire world. My moral strength does not merely strengthen my neighbor. It strengthens the ground that I walk on. It strengthens the air that I breathe. My moral failure does not merely bring down my neighbor to a lower moral level, but it endangers the well-being and the welfare of the entire planet. And I hate to say it, but we can see the cost of humanity ignoring our job of le'ovdo le'shomro, of taking care of serving and working the land and protecting the land. We see the wages of sin, if you will, right? In the quest in running after money, generation after generation, we have not just impoverished the earth, but we have destroyed the earth. We've destroyed the very ground on which we walk and the very air that we breathe. So this is not some kind of a
political statement.
This is not some kind of a metaphor.
It's not a fact.
Huh?
It's a political ideology. It's not a fact.
Okay, we can argue about that.
We could.
It's a but so what I'm saying is that Parshat Noach is not some kind of a metaphor, right? That we have an impact on the whole world, and for good and for ill. And there's a lot of it that we're living now with a lot of the repercussions of people not having taken to heart their stewardship of the resources that we all depend on to survive. Bet. Adam she'avonotav merubin al zchuyotav miyad hu met b'rish'o. Interesting. A person, an individual whose demerits are greater than their merits, immediately dies in his wickedness. So, any thoughts? Please.
I think it can be interpreted that like the blind is considered dead, or the one who doesn't have children considered dead. So those kind of things would happen to this person immediately.
Interesting. I hadn't thought of that. Any other thoughts?
I didn't hear you.
But so the first sentence of the next halacha, he says, Adam she'avonotav merubin al zchuyotav, a person whose demerits are greater than his merits, miyad hu met b'risho, immediately he dies in his wickedness. So I don't have a zchuyot and avonot Geiger counter, right? I don't have a meter that I can flash on somebody and tell and tell who has more zuchuyot, who has more merits, and who has more demerits. But I can't, so I can't say that, and I don't think anybody else has the ability to do that. But I question Rambam's use of the word miyad. What does it mean that immediately a person will die? Anybody?
Maybe before a certain age. There's a list of, if you die in the age of 50,
right.
60.
I'm not saying that I have the right answer. I'm saying, I'm saying that it's a word. And again, remember, Rambam wrote this sefer in Hebrew. So this is not a question of maybe a translation or an interpretation that might be different, right? This is Rambam's own language, and Rambam was a very medactic, is very medactic in his use of language. So what does it mean that a person miyad dies immediately?
Look, but the lightning comes and you're dead. That doesn't make sense.
No.
It must be something deeper.
Right. And so, I think back to Pasha Bereshit, right? Where God says, the day that you eat the fruit, you will die. And the Nachash, the serpent, says to Chava, no, the day you eat the fruit, you won't die.
But, you have consequences based on life choices and ramifications on what those choices result in. And sometimes, you have an immediate result, or sometimes you've set something into motion that will take place sometime in the future.
Yes, I agree.
They can't be prevented.
I agree.
But if you died immediately, how do you do teshuva?
Good question.
Yeah,
Good question, right? So my own reading of this is as Mordechai is saying, it's like, from the moment that we come to that situation of imbalance, we have set in motion a process which I think teshuva is the answer. Is like, how do we reverse that process? How do we get back? How do we get back our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu through teshuva? And so to be in a position of being somebody who will die because of one's sins, I think the miyad is exactly that. The miyad is like at the moment where Chava is about to eat the fruit. The miyad is like, if you do this, then a longer term consequence with, as you say, an unpredictable, or that the individual cannot necessarily foresee the steps that will lead to that outcome, and nobody can predict the exact moment of that outcome. But that outcome now becomes a reality. That outcome becomes, is it avoidable? It may be avoidable today, it may be avoidable tomorrow, it may not be avoidable the day after tomorrow, depending on our continued action. So, shenemar al rov avonecha. V'chen medina she'avonoteha merobim miyad hi ovedet. And also a nation, a country, where the sins are greater than the demerits are greater than the merits. Again, immediately will perish. Right? V'chen kol ha'olam kulo, and even the entire world. Im hayu avonotehem merobim mizchuyotehem miyad hem nishhatim. It's pretty tough, right? If the whole world's demerits are greater than their merits, immediately the world will be destroyed.
But God promised not to destroy the world.
Are you going to argue with God about this? I don't know. This is not the world. This is, I'm sorry, yes, this is the entire world. Yes. Well, God promised not to destroy the world with a flood.
Different.
God's keeping some powder in reserve, sort of thing.
Different kind of.
Shene'emar vayar Adonai ki rabba ra'at ha'adam ba'aretz. Oh, right there. Right in the parsha that we're reading, right? V'shikol ze eno lefi minyan hazuchuyot ve'avonot. But this balance, this
Equation?
Gleichgewicht, this, whatchamacallit. Anyway, I can't think of the word in 6 different languages, so I'm just going to leave it. But this is not according. This balance is not according to a pure numerical count of how many merits and how many demerits. Rather, lefi godlam, but rather according to their magnitude. Yesh zechut shehi keneged kama avonot. There are merits which outweigh a number of demerits if placed on the scale against them. Shene'amar yan nimtza bo davar tov. Like that, you might find something really good, right? So the context there is, a person is like, they're condemned, but you should take a close look because maybe they have a good quality, a merit that will outweigh all of the demerits, all of the bad things that we see in this person. There may be something good in that person that will counteract the impact of their demerits. V'yesh avon shehu keneged kama zchuyot. But also on the other side, there are bad things that you do. You get one demerit that can wipe out the effect of a whole list of good acts. Had ya'abed tova arbeh. And it quotes from Kohelet saying, one sin cancels out or makes us lose a lot of good. ואין שוקלין אלא בדעתו של אל דעות. והוא היודע איך עורכים הזכויות כנגד העבודות. And the only one who knows how to do this calculation of, weighing good versus bad, weighing merits versus demerits, it's only God. Meaning, we got to watch our behavior because we never know, as it says in the Gemara, or in Pirkei Avot, right? You should be very careful in the performance of what we consider even the smallest mitzvot, and very careful in the committing of what we call even the smallest averot, because we don't know the merit that we gain or the reward that we gain from a mitzvah, and we don't know what we lose or the avera. We don't know the magnitude of the avera that we get from committing one transgression. Right?
Can we have some idea?
Excuse me?
Can we have some idea about the merits? All the punishments. There are punishments, like the Torah says that if you do such and such,
right,
such will happen. So we do it.
Right, and Rambam will talk about some of those later on also. Right, well, we talked about in the first parak about what are called the light and the heavy, right? The kalot and chumorot, and that was according to what the punishments were, right? And the sequence or the process that one has to go through in order to accomplish teshuvah for them. But yeah, and the other piece to remember from Pirkei Avot again is that not just that we have to be very careful about performing a mitzvah because we don't know what the reward is, and we have to be very careful to distance ourselves from averot because we don't know what the consequence or the punishment is. But also we know the principle, which is it's clear from human psychology, right? Clear we see in our own behavior if we're honest about ourselves and the behavior of other people around us, that mitzvah goreret mitzvah, avera goreret avera. That we do when we set our minds to doing a mitzvah, it puts us in the mindset and puts us in the physical behavior path of doing another mitzvah. If I wake up in the morning and I say, I don't feel like going to shul today, I'll just daven at home. Okay, so I daven, so that's a mitzvah, right? But if I say to myself, I don't feel like going to shul today, but yeah, okay, so I get to shul, and guess what? There were 9 guys there waiting for a 10th man to show up for a minyan. I get to shul, and I make the minyan, and guess what? After the minyan, a woman comes in, and she's a widow, and she's poor, and so I get an opportunity to not just put a couple of coins in the pushka, but to put a coin into the hand of an individual who needs it, right? So the one mitzvah of motivating myself to go to shul and be a part of the minyan in the morning, goheret, how many mitzvot that I was part of the minyan, right? That I was able to, and by the way, by my being part of a minyan, it's not just that there's a count of 10 people, right? But also that my tefillah has the ability to inspire the person standing next to me, right? And because the minyan it's a team. It's not 10 individuals standing there, right? It's a team. And as they say, teamwork makes the dream work, right? As Rambam says that when when we call out and cry to God for forgiveness and for mercy, that God will hear us during Hilchot Teshuva, during the 10 days of repentance. But if we're on our own, it's not so clear that God will answer us. But if we're praying with a minyan, miyad. Right? Rambam says that the power of praying as part of a minyan it's phenomenal. It's awesome, and it also contributes to the other part of it that we were talking about earlier, which is Rambam's understanding of why the Torah requires us to create and to work hard to maintain a functioning society. And there are a couple of, in Judaism, there are a couple of core building blocks of social interaction, if you will, right? There's the family, and there's the community, there's the minyan, right? I wake up in the morning, Baruch Hashem, with my family, right? And I wake up in the morning, Baruch Hashem, with my family, I have my coffee, and I go to the minyan, Baruch Hashem, right? I have now performed 2 communal acts. I have affirmed my identity as a part, as a key functioning member of 2 levels of the community, 2 of the basic building blocks of the community. In my family, people can come to me and say, I need you to help me with this, I need you to do this for me. Can I do that for you? There's an interaction and there's an expectation of, it's not pure reciprocity, right? But there's an expectation. Again, the Torah is not about what I get. The Torah is not about what my gifts and rights are. The Torah is about my obligations. And the family and the minyan are 2 beautiful places for me to exercise and learn the proper use and the proper application of my obligations towards others, right? And if I can, Bezrat Hashem, maintain a functioning family, which is also a challenge, and if I can, Bezrat Hashem, maintain my role in a well-functioning minyan, which is also not always the simplest thing in the world, because, let's face it, well, I don't know about anybody else here, but, every once in a while I'll say, I wish that guy wouldn't daven so loud. I wish that guy wouldn't daven so fast. I wish that guy would take a shower. I wish, instead of being open to just accepting everybody around me, right? It's not always the easiest thing in the world. Sometimes I haven't had my coffee. Sometimes I had too much coffee. Sometimes I just, I'm feeling ornery about it, okay? But Ahavat Yisrael, it's something we must continually work at. That's why the first thing we say in the morning before we put on the talit is, I take upon myself the mitzvah of ve'ahavta l're'acha kamocha, right? Which Rambam will discuss later on, his meaning of that pasuk, the notion of loving one's fellow as oneself, which again, Rambam's definition of that mitzvah is a very decidedly a societal definition, and it really, I think, when we come to Bezrat Hashem, we'll see how much it really brings out Rambam's view of how a society is supposed to function.
It's impossible to love your fellow man like you love yourself. It's you got the comma in the wrong place. It should be love your fellow man because he is like yourself.
Very good. Very good. It's a great taich. Thank you. Nonetheless, there are other readings of it, which, Bezrat Hashem, we'll get to Rambam's reading of it. Remember that for when we come to it. Halacha Gimel. This is a tough one. Kol mi shenicham al hamitzvot she'asa ve'etaha al zchuyot ve'amar belibo everybody who regrets all the mitzvot that they did, and dismisses the merits that he gained from them, and says to himself, what did I get out of doing all this? What good did all this do me? Halavai lo asiti otan. I wish I'd never done that. הרי זה איבד את כולן ואין מזכירין לו שום זכות בעולם. שנאמר צדקת הצדיקים לא תצדילהו ביום פשעו. The person who says, I wish I'd never done all these mitzvot, what good did it ever do me? That person loses forever the zchut, the benefit, if you will, the loses forever the schut, the benefit of having done those, the reward of having done those mitzvot, and they will never help him. They'll never come back to help him. אין זה אלא בתוהל הראשונות. וכשם ששוקלים זכויות אדם בעוונותיו בשעת מיתתו, כך בכל שנה ושנה שוקלים עוונות כל אחד ואחד מבני העולם עם זכויותיו ביום טוב של ראש שנה. Okay, we'll come back to in a second. So, saying that a person, there are, it's human nature. People, you have a bad day. You wake up on the wrong side of the bed, as we say. You had a lousy cup of coffee. You go to shul, and you're in a bad mood. And you look at the guy standing next to you, the one who always prays so loud and it bothers you that he's davening so loud. Which, by the way, so every day I go to shul and there's a guy standing next to me and I don't like listening to the way he's davening, so why don't I go stand someplace else? But, again, this is also a human nature thing. Like, I'm standing here, he's standing there. Why is he standing next to me davening so loud? Instead of saying, well, you know what? He's got to daven his way. I've got to daven my way. I'll go to another corner. But people, we don't think of that. Right? It's amazing if we watch ourselves, how we, Rabbi, hi, how we work ourselves into, like we paint ourselves into a corner. Rabbi, do you want to say something?
Not yet to interrupt.
Okay. We morally and societally and emotionally, we paint ourselves into a corner over and over and over again. If we watch our behavior in the course of the day, it's shocking and fascinating to see how often we put ourselves into a situation where we know we're going to be uncomfortable, or we recognize that, oh, here's that feeling again. And every time we feel ourselves saying, here's that feeling again, or worse, why does this always happen to me, right? The first thing we need to look at is our own behavior. What were the steps that we took to get there? Because when we're saying this is happening again, it's a pattern. And it's not the world's pattern, it's my pattern. So what have I done to reinforce that pattern? And what can I do to break that pattern? And sometimes the first and most important thing that we can do is just to recognize that there's a pattern and that I did have a role in bringing this about. And if I can accept that I had a role in bringing it about, maybe it's not so bad. If I can accept that everybody is, because I'm not the only one who's behaving according to my pattern. The guy standing next to me, I don't like listening to the way he davens. He's on his pattern. You're on your pattern. They're on your pattern. We're all on our own patterns, right? And it's the very pattern of our lives that often leads us into moments of discontent or, God forbid, of anger and despair. And so when we're in a moment, God forbid, we're in a moment of despair, well, it's a common enough thing. We see it in society. We see it, it happens in the movies. We read about it in novels and stuff, right? That husband and wife get into an argument. And why do they get into an argument? They get into an argument because one of them had a bad day at work. So I had a bad day at work. I come home and I got to yell at my wife. What did she have to do with it? But my wife is the only other one in the room. And unlike my coworker, especially unlike my boss, if I yell at my boss can fire me. If I yell at my wife, she'll slam the door and go sulk in the bedroom, and an hour later she'll be cooking me dinner, right? So yelling at my wife is an easy way out, right? But the more I have discontent at work and the more I take it out on my family, the more dysfunctional that becomes and the more dangerous that becomes. And then the more the entire situation tips over into a situation of despair. And we see families ruined by people's inability to separate their spheres of activity, by people's inability, instead of coming home and saying to my wife, what, dinner's not ready? I can come home and say to my wife, I'm sorry, sweetie, I had a really horrible day today. Give me a minute and I'll tell you about it, right? And look at how different that relationship ends up being. And I come home with the same sense of discontent and the same anger. But my wife is either my whipping post or she's my partner. And this is a very, very common situation in families in this world today, unfortunately. And it's more common the more people do not, the more we do not consider our own actions, the more we do not look at our act, the more we think that this is just the fabric of my life. Well, it's not the fabric of my life. It's what did I do to put myself in this situation? And so, there's nobody that we're more intimate with than God. And my wife, if I yell at her, she'll go out for a walk, or she'll, I'm going to go home to my mother, and she'll stay at her mom's place for 2 or 3 nights, and then she'll come back, right? But God, we say, will never reject us. So what does it cost me to reject God if I'm that upset, if I'm that angry? And so I'm going to say, you know what? I wish I'd never done any of these things. Well, says Rambam, it's not so simple. There's a baseline, if you will. There's a aleph. There's a nekudat aleph. There's a point at which we must hold on to that relationship. We must cling to that relationship. And to say to God, I wish I'd never met you. I wish I never had a relationship with you. Well, it's a terrible thing to contemplate. In another context, the Rambam talks about the megadef, about the person who, quote unquote, blesses God with the name. And it's a very harsh and very fascinating section of the Torah, that when people hear someone curse, that they take the person outside the camp and they put their hands on the person physically and they say, you brought this on yourself. And then the person is stoned to death. And I would submit that the reason that we have to put our hands on the person and say, you brought this on yourself, is because we are all responsible for each other. And it's not so pashat that a person brings it on themselves. To get to that point of estrangement, to get to that point of alienation, to get to that point of despair and anger, that a person is driven to do something like that in public, in defiance not just of God, but in defiance of everything that the Jewish community stands for, that person is saying, this community has damaged me, has injured me beyond repair. I can no longer stand to be a part of this community, and I have to express my rage, my alienation, my disappointment. So the fact is that the person, can you say they brought it on themselves? Well, yes, theoretically we all have the ability to control our behavior at a certain point. But we cannot deny that we as a community had a hand in driving the person to that point. And it's a very sad and very tragic situation. And it's one that, unfortunately, I think, in far less black and white terms, but it's one that we see repeated within our community and in the broader society when we don't take our responsibilities towards one another seriously enough. Where we say, I did enough. So that's the difference what I said before about when I motivate myself to go to Minyan. It's nice, I get up in the morning, I put a couple of coins in my pushka. But when I go to Minyan and I see a person who's suffering, a person who is in need, and I put the coins in that person's hand, something else happens. Something, it may be very, very small, but a transformative effect. There's a transformative effect of me having a physical encounter with that person, looking that person in the eye, saying, this is for you, I hope things go well for you, right? Because more than, or accompanying the money, there's also receiving chizuk from the society. There's also knowing that the society cares enough about me that when I walk into the room, people aren't going to say to me, get out of here. So and so there's a again, Rambam, it's a very, very important point in terms of our societal identity, right? That we've done all these mitzvot all our lives, now we get to a point where we're feeling alienated, upset, but we need to look, we need to stop and pause, we need to pause and reflect. We need to say, okay, I did these in good faith, and now I feel like they mean nothing to me. So this makes me think of Elisha ben Abuya, right? Of the Rav in the Gemara is called Acher, Elisha ben Abuya, the teacher of Rabbi Meir, right? Who said he saw a man climbing a tree, right, to shoo away the mother bird so he could take the egg, which in the Torah says if you do that it'll give you a long life. And the man climbed the tree and then he fell and he broke his neck and he died. And Elisha ben Abuya says, this is the Torah and this is its reward, forget it. Which is why, I mean, it's a complex and an amazing story, but which is why the Bat Kol said when he was riding his horse past the Beit Knesset on Shabbat Yom Kippur, and a Bat Kol said, everybody in the world can do tshuva, and the tshuva will be accepted, except Elisha ben Abuya. And kind of the sign that he was lost, if you will. And the tragic weakness was, Bat Kol, like the most famous story about the Bat Kol is the Tanosh Alachnai, right, where they argue about how the oven is supposed to be made. And they say, if I'm right, then the walls of the Beit Midrash will fall over, and if I'm right, the river will run backwards, and and all those things happen. The Bat Kol says, he's right, and the rabbis stand up and say, what? Lo b'shamayim hi. You don't get to tell us what's right. You gave us the Torah. It's our job to apply it in our lives, and we decided he's wrong. We don't listen to a Bat Kol. If anything, a Bat Kol, it's almost like telling us we didn't understand the situation properly. The Bat Kol is saying to Elisha ben Abuya, please, stand up for yourself. God wants you to stand up for yourself. It's not too late. And he says, you know what? It's too late. And the despair that a person must feel to be able to be in a position of not being able to say, God, one more chance. God, please let me come back. I can't imagine how that must feel. And so what Rambam is kind of, he's just giving us like kind of black letter halachas, but the picture that he paints of human despair here is to me just so unimaginable, and so it's like so korei alev, it's so heartbreaking to contemplate what must drive a person to be able to say something like this. כשם ששוקלין זכויות אדם ועוונותיו בשעה מיתתו, just like a person's merits and demerits are weighed at the time of their death, כך בכל שנה ושנה שוקלין עוונות כל אחד ואחד מבאי העולם עם זכויותיו ביום טוב של ראש שנה. Similarly, the whole world, not just all Bnei Israel, the whole world, their merits and demerits are judged on the day of Rosh Hashanah. מי שנמצא צדיק נחתם לחיים. A person who at that moment is tzaddik, meaning what? The magnitude and or number of his zchuyot are greater than his avonot. The number and magnitude of his merits are greater than his demerits. Is a tzaddik. Yes, sir.
Could we apply for an exception and have the journalists judged separately? I think they're pulling us down.
Well, see, the problem with that is that everybody, if you go around this table, not to mention going around the whole city of Jerusalem, but the entire world, everybody has a different opinion as to which group should be in the crosshairs.
Yeah.
Right? And by the way, journalists is not a monolithic group. I'm sure there are journalists that you respect. Maybe two, maybe not.
There's some good ones somewhere.
Okay, so מי שנמצא צדיק נחתם לחיים. At that moment. ומי שנמצא רשע נחתם למיתה. And a person who is judged to be a rasha at that moment is sealed for death. והבינוני תולין לו עד יום הכיפורים. And the Benoni, a person is exactly 50-50, they're put into suspension. Hello? Shabbat, please. They're put in suspension, if you will, until Yom Kippur. אם עשה תשובה נחתם לחיים, ואם לאו נחתם למיתה. And if that person does, and if a person does teshuvah, then they're sealed for life, and if not, then they are sealed for death. So we know, and we touched on this last time, right? The kind of odd timing of Yom Kippur, that we are told that that's the day when it's decided whether our sins are forgiven, and yet the sins are counted year by year, and the year just closed. And we give ourselves like an extra 10 days beyond the end of the year. Rosh Hashanah is the day of judgment for the previous year. And we're judged, but then we're given like a suspended sentence, and we're given an opportunity to do what? To do community service sort of thing, to pay our fines, to make good on debts or on injuries that we've brought on other people in the course of the year. So that's the period where it's kind of like saying, okay, you've just been judged. It took me a whole year to get to this point of now it's Rosh Hashanah, I'm standing in front of God and I say, oh, you know what? I forgot all about this. Like, I'm being judged now. Wait a minute. What did I not do? How can I make up for what, I'm standing here and there goes the shofar, it's too late. Okay? So the Torah and Chazal are, I mean, the understanding of human nature is absolutely brilliant. Like, which again, as we mentioned last time, there's a beautiful minhag, which is certainly a minhag of Chabad, from Yud Het Elul, from the 18th day of Elul, the 12 days from there until Rosh Hashanah, to go do a look back to the previous year. And each day, each of those 12 days, we go and look back at at the 12 months of the previous year, and we do a cheshbon nefesh of, you know, what did I do? What did I not do? What should I have done? What could I have done? What could I have not done? How could I have avoided it? And so when we come to Rosh Hashanah, we're standing in front of God and we say, you know what? I have a list. It's maybe not comprehensive. I'm sure your list is better. And that's why we have that all those aleph betas, like in the vidui, for example, Ashanu, Bagatnu, Gazalnu, right? Because anything that's a whole list of aleph beta, the text, the literary signal, if you will, of that aleph beta is that it's meant to be all comprehensive, all inclusive, right? And it's Ashamnu, not Ashamti, right? So I'm putting myself as part of Klal Yisrael. I'm not setting myself apart. I'm not separating myself. I'm saying I'm just like everybody else. I want to leave with one thought, which is, I had a chidush this year on Kal Nidre, and as the Gemara says, you know, I love my chidush because it's mine, and I would like to share it with you, which is, we say Kal Nidre. So after we say Kal Nidre, what do we say? We say with the permission of the Beit Din Shel Mala and the Beit Din Shel Mata, from the Beit Din and the heavenly court, the tribunal in Shemayim, and the court here on the earth. Anu matirim litpalel im ha'avaryonim. We give ourselves permission to pray with sinners, criminals, however you translate the word, okay? So, any thoughts as to like what that text actually means, or why we say that?
I never heard the phrase.
You say it every Yom Kippur. It's part of Kal Nidre. Okay. So I want to suggest that, you know, what made me think about, well, I was the one who was leading Kal Nidre, or I was saying one of the repetitions of the Kal Nidre. I was thinking about it, I said, you know, what right do I have to think that I'm so special, and I'm calling everybody else in the room Avayanim? And everybody else in the room is saying the same thing, meaning that they're lumping me together with the Avayanim. So who's right? What's going on here? And we say it 3 times. So I want to suggest the following. I want to suggest that the first time we say it, we'll say it, let's say, with just the recognition that, like, you know, there are other people here who are not on my Midrega. You know, I've struggled really hard to be a good Jew all year, and you know what? But we'll all come along together. My davening will help to schlep along the other people who are not on my level. Great, I'm going to do my part as, you know, taking spiritual leadership here for Klal Yisrael. And the second time I say it, I'm saying to myself, I'm no better than them. You know, who am I to say that I'm better, that they're Avayonim and I'm not? I'm not any better. And the third time, I'm saying, I'm one of them. This is all of us, God. I'm down at the same, anybody that I judge negatively, I'm for sure at least down at their level, maybe lower. Who am I to say that I'm here and they're down here? Adarabba, it's time for me to look at myself and my world from the bottom up. I'm you know, mima'amakim. I'm down at the bottom of the pit, right? And until we are able to internalize that feeling, or I would say that working to internalize that feeling, I would submit, is a key part of the process of Teshuvah, which is why we spend the entire month of Elul, because, you know, like, well, especially as Sephardim, you know, we say Slichot the entire month of Elul. And the slichot, it's a, I don't know about you. I enjoy going to shul. I enjoy being in a minyan. Regular weekday minyan, fine. I love slichot. 5 o'clock in the morning we say, it's great. I love it. It's a very cathartic feeling. It's a very uplifting feeling, right? But my davening is not about how I feel. My davening is, to the extent that there's human feeling involved, it's my job to support the other people in the room. And my davening is not about, I came out of it having a great experience. It's my obligation is to daven 3 times a day and to give that to Hashem as my, not just as a gift, but it's the price of entry, right? And so I think the wisdom of having the slichot, especially, I would say, for me personally anyway, for the entire month of Elul, is it takes a while to get into the mindset of getting over how good a time I'm having doing this. I get up very early in the morning anyway. I've been up since 10 after 4 this morning, okay? So to me to go to shul at 5 o'clock in the morning, it's not such a big tircha, okay? But it takes a while before I get over that, this is great, we're doing this again. And then I get to the point of, at Halavai, at some point during the month of Elul, I should have even a moment where I connect to the despair of being a human being and not being capable of living up to my own expectations or my own image of what God expects from me. Halavai, I should have at least one moment and then be able to grab that moment and cherish that moment and carry that moment over to my tefillah on Rosh Hashanah, and then carry that moment over to Yom Kippur, and then carry that moment over to Hoshana Rabbah. And then I can truly have Simchat Torah. Baruch Adonai L'Olam. Amen. Amen. Thank you very much.